Next up, we got Absolute Mad Labs, Bonnie and Clyde, Part 2. Now, we broke the light goal once again. So let's say thanks to y'all. You know what I'm saying? Thank you very much. You feel me? Let you know that you're actually listening and watching the whole video. Or actually, you know what I'm saying? Yeah, what I said, whatever. So yeah, once again, thank you. But anytime I ask for a light goal and we break the light goal, I got y'all. You know what I'm saying? Simple transaction. You feel me? Simple transaction. But hey, let's see what it be time about.
Important, you need to understand that this was a time where the economy was in absolute shambles, and those that couldn't afford to buy the dip needed a distraction, because reading about the latest developments of the Great Depression was, well, it was depressing. Which led to a series of sensationalised stories in the media about gangsters and crooks that the cops were hunting. And Bonnie and Clyde were no exception. The media wanted to run their story, and now they had pictures. The photos and stories of their crime spree spread like wildfire, and the newspapers couldn't print them fast enough. The newspapers depicted Bonnie and Clyde as Depression-era Robin Hoods who were taking the fight to the banks and hitting the fat cats on Wall Street where it hurt. Sure, they were violent criminals, but the couple were living out a fantasy that everyone secretly had. After all, those bastards had it coming. And look at how in love Bonnie and Clyde are. How could you not want love to prevail like that? Also, what really added to the couple's image was this now very famous picture of Bonnie posing with a cigar in her mouth. And it really captured the imaginations of the masses because it was unladylike, rebellious, youthful, nihilistic, and all of the other stuff that people look for in a girl boss. People thought that this picture had so much big dick energy that they assumed that Bonnie was actually the leader of the Barrow Gang and not Clyde. In addition to the boost to the Barrow Gang's infamy, the pictures also showed why Clyde liked Bonnie so much. Her 4'10" frame made him look like less of a manlet. Bonnie and Clyde quickly found themselves as bona fide
Who is taller? What's the face taller?
Celebrities.
Is Bonnie taller than Clyde?
Alongside the likes of John Dillinger and Machine Gun Kelly, in what was known as the Public Enemy era. And people couldn't get enough of them. Their popularity was so huge that they became a big influence on the movie landscape. Movies about gangsters that were played by massive stars became so widespread that the authorities later got concerned by how classy and glamorous the depictions of such criminals ended up being on the silver screen, which partly gave rise to the infamous Hollywood Hays Code. And the Hays Code is something we'll actually be discussing soon in another video. So, the media had made Bonnie and Clyde romantic anti-heroes, blasting their way from bank to bank, sticking it to the man and also each other. But what was life on the run actually like for the couple? Not great, actually. It was pretty fucking miserable. I mean, while depression angst was certainly a motivation for their crime spree and they did rob a few banks, the vast majority of their targets were small shops and gas stations. The robberies weren't even really planned out or coordinated either. They would just drive past one and go, "Oh, there's one." And that was as much planning as they did. They would just run out of money while on the road, hit a store for a quick buck, keep running until they ran out of money again, find another store, possibly the first one that they came across, rinse and repeat, and they would usually make very little money from each robbery, often leaving stores with only about $10 or $20, which back then was kind of a lot, but it's also not a lot. Despite how
that's
much
that's probably $100 now or something like that. You make like $100, $150. You know what I'm saying? I think that's probably like the good comparison. Maybe 200.
Their real lives lacked the glamour of the headlines. Bonnie and Clyde liked the attention, and Clyde even fancied himself as a modern Jesse James, as he often went out of his way to avoid harming any innocent civilians, and that one cop that we talked about earlier. Not so much the guy in the driveway that was trying to stop WD from stealing his car, but, you know, that's by the by. Clyde would even throw a bone to the civilians that he kidnapped, like in the case of a mortician named H. Dillard Darby. On the 27th of April, Darby was eating lunch in a boarding house when he saw W.D. Jones stealing his car. Luckily, a nearby woman named Sophia Stone was kind enough to help him give chase in her own car. They made it 2 blocks before the rest of the Barrow gang pulled them over, kidnapping them both by forcing the two into their car and then driving off. Despite initially having their lives threatened, the tough guy facade was quickly dropped and the gang got talking with Darby and Sophia. And they all became genuinely friendly. So friendly, in fact, that the gang promised to release them unharmed. Sophia and Darby were released on a road just outside of Waldo, Arkansas, and the Barrow gang sped off. However, the two couldn't celebrate their survival just yet because the car suddenly reversed and was heading straight towards them. Sophia and Darby panicked, thinking the gang had changed their minds. But the gang had come back just to give them money. Bonnie handed them $5 to help them get home. And then Clyde promised Darby, since he was a mortician, that he could embalm his body in the event of his death. Now that was nice, wasn't it? That was very thoughtful of Bonnie and Clyde. I'm sure that Darby greatly appreciated the kind gesture. He never got his car back, though. While the gang enjoyed the publicity and the legend that they were establishing for themselves, it did make their lives much harder. They kept getting recognised, which meant that staying in motels was out of the question, resulting in them needing to sleep in the car or at remote campsites. But I imagine that the worst part of all this fame was disappointing their fans. Upon discovering that Clyde was anything but larger than life, one person described him as, and I quote, "nothing but a little bitty fart."
Oh!
Imagine being famous for being not just a ruthless killer, but a ruthless cop killer, and the takeaway that people get when they meet you is simply manlet. By the summer of 1933, the Barrow gang had split up for a while to do their own thing. And on the 8th of June, Bonnie, Clyde and W.D. Jones were on their way to meet back up with Buck and Blanche in Oklahoma, when they had a car accident near Wellington, Texas. They were heading towards a river, unaware that the bridge had been removed. Clyde slammed on the brakes, but it was too late. The car swerved off the road and into the ravine. And then it burst into flames. Clyde and W.D. Jones got out unscathed, but Bonnie was thrown out of the window by the impact and pinned under the car as it rolled. Clyde and W.D. Jones managed to pull her out from under the wreckage, but the damage had been done. Bonnie's injuries were life-threatening. A nearby farmer who noticed the accident approached them to offer assistance. But then he recognised them. So he started running away to call the cops. So Clyde chased after the farmer, stopped him, and then stole the farmer's car, and then called a doctor before meeting up with Buck and Blanche in Arkansas. The rest of the Barrow gang went off to steal some quick cash, while Clyde never left Bonnie's side. Bonnie's sister then helped her with her recovery, and she once gave a pretty grim description of her sister's injury, and she is quoted as saying, "Bonnie's leg, all the muscle. She was burned to the bone on her calf of her leg. She never walked any more straight. She walked with a limp, a bad limp. She never got over that." Bonnie's injury was so bad that she could barely walk, and Clyde often had to carry her. But nevertheless, once Bonnie recovered as well as she could, the gang was back on the road doing what they did best. On the 18th of July 1933, the Barrow Gang stayed at the Red Crown tourist camp in Missouri, where the night clerk's suspicions were aroused by the sight of 4 heavily armed people carrying an injured Bonnie into their cabins. And
Alright, my bad, y'all. My bad.
And because they just can't seem to catch a break, he called the cops. And you know what happened next. The cops came and a shootout started. However, this escape didn't go as well as the last one, and Buck took 2 bullets to the head.
Ooh.
Blanche managed to push Buck into the car while Clyde carried Bonnie. W.D. Jones shot at the door of an armoured car that was blocking their path until it moved, and then Clyde started driving and burst through the garage and into the night. However, the cops kept shooting, shattering the glass windows of the car, which permanently blinded Blanche in her left eye. Once they were out of harm's way, Bonnie dressed the gang's wounds until, to continue their stroke of sheer bad luck, they were spotted by a hunter who, again, called the fucking cops. This time, the shooting was very much one-sided. Bonnie and Clyde both took bullets to the arm, but they and W.D. Jones managed to escape. Blanche...
That's the thing, though, bro. When you're escaping from the cops, bro, it's like this. Like, the cops, it's more of them than you. All right, that's for one, bro. So you're running from the cops or whatever. You know what I'm saying? You're not going to get far. You feel me? Because just off of pure luck, somebody gonna recognize you, just like all the people did. Somebody gonna recognize you, and then now, you know what I'm saying, everybody is calling the cops, giving you a location. You literally just got a shootout, and now somebody else, you know what I'm saying, somebody else has found you 10 miles away. Now you about to get another shootout again. You know what I'm saying? And then not even with that, like, if the cops find you and they have like an idea where you at, they can literally circle the block, circle all the blocks, circle, like, you know what I'm saying, close off intersections and just wait for you. You know what I'm saying? Then you really be fucked. You feel me? So it's like they have tens and thousands of cops and it's just 3 you, or how many ever gang it was. You know what I'm saying? It's hard, bro. It's really hard. So if you get away from the cops, bro, it's like props to you.
And Buck, however, were too injured to go on, so they surrendered. Buck died in hospital with his mother by his side, and on the 30th of July, Blanche was imprisoned for 10 years. She later got parole after 6 years and managed to then go on to live a normal life. By this point, after so many close calls, W.D. Jones was just absolutely done with the criminal lifestyle, and he left Bonnie and Clyde in November of 1933. He was later captured by the cops and got a lighter sentence in exchange for giving intel on his former partners and claiming that Clyde had forced him to join them. Now, alone and with the Barrow Gang gone, there was only Bonnie and Clyde, who ended the year with a series of near misses with the cops. Nevertheless, they were going to start 1934 with a bang. Even though the Barrow Gang had fallen apart, Bonnie and Clyde were now both crippled and the cops were hunting them with a greater fervour than ever, the couple were undeterred. while they still had each other, they could keep going. And it was time for one more big job. They may have lost the gang, but fortune favours the bold, and they were on a mission. And Clyde would be damned if that mission went unaccomplished. It was make or break time. At long last, Clyde was going to fulfill his vow. The target, Eastham Prison Farm. Bonnie and Clyde went back to Waldo, Texas to carry out their mission, where they enlisted the help of an old acquaintance of theirs who was incarcerated in the prison, Ray Hamilton. He was to be their inside man. They also enlisted the help of Ray's brother, Floyd, who wanted to break his brother out of prison. Floyd then visited Ray in prison to brief him on what the plan was. Bonnie, Clyde and Floyd then hid some guns in a ditch on the prison grounds. As the convicts went out to work, an inmate named Joe Palmer retrieved the guns and slipped one to Ray Hamilton. Then it was showtime. At around 7 a.m. on the 16th of January 1934, Palmer and Hamilton started shooting, killing a guard. They then ran through the fog towards the getaway car where Bonnie and Clyde were waiting. Palmer and Hamilton then made it into the car along with two other convicts, one of whom was Henry Methvin, who joined Bonnie and Clyde on the road. Now, Bonnie and Clyde were always a high priority target, but this prison break got them on the cops' shit list in a much bigger way than ever. As a result, a posse was assembled to hunt the outlaws down once and for all. And this posse was led by a former Texas Ranger by the name of Frank Hamer. You know, the one with the big iron on his hip. However, Clyde did not make it easy for them. Clyde managed to avoid them with his impressive driving skills and choice of car, the Ford V8, which Clyde loved so much that he sent a letter to Henry Ford himself in April of 1934, which read, "Dear Sir, while I still have got breath in my lungs, I will tell you what a dandy car you make. I have drove Fords exclusively when I could get away with one. For sustained speed and freedom from trouble, the Ford has got every other car skinned, and even if my business hasn't been strictly legal, it don't hurt anything to tell you what a fine car you got in the V8. Yours truly, Clyde Champion Barrow." I don't know what's funnier, the fact that he told Henry Ford how much he loves stealing his product, or the fact that he signed his letter as fucking Champion. By May, however, Bonnie and Clyde were beginning to run out of gas, and they knew that the inevitable was coming. On the 6th of May 1934, they paid a visit to their families, where Bonnie gave her mother a poem titled "The Trail's End," the final stanza of which reads, "Someday they'll go down together. They'll bury them side by side. To few it will be grief, to the law a relief, but it's death for Bonnie and Clyde." We've run out of fun shit now, boys. It only gets more depressing from here. Over time, Officer Frank Hamer figured out a pattern in the Barrow Gang's visits to their families, and he predicted where they would be next. And he had help. Henry Methvin's father, who had harboured Bonnie and Clyde at his farm in Louisiana before, was cooperating with the cops in exchange for amnesty for his son. With the support of Methvin Sr. and knowing that Bonnie and Clyde would inevitably stop by, Officer Hamer was ready. On the 23rd of May 1934, Bonnie and Clyde were driving down a country road near the home of Henry Methvin's father. when they saw him at the side of the road, seemingly having engine trouble. As expected, Clyde stopped to help the old man. And then it happened. Methvin Sr. dove under his truck and Hamer gave the order. It was an ambush. The entire posse emerged from the bushes by the side of the road and opened fire. The couple were absolutely riddled with bullets. At the ages of 23 and 25 respectively, Bonnie Parker and Clyde Barrow were killed instantly. Seriously, what the posse did was complete overkill. They just absolutely mag-dumped into the couple and their car. There was so much shooting that the entire posse was slightly deaf for a few hours afterwards. The car was left with 112 bullet holes. Clyde was hit 17 times and Bonnie took 26 bullets. Several of those were headshots, and Clyde's spinal column was completely severed. Now, that sounds bad, but the posse really couldn't have taken any chances. The car was absolutely loaded. There were over a dozen guns and several thousand rounds of ammunition in the car. There are pictures and videos of the aftermath of the ambush, but you can go and find that shit for yourselves. It's pretty grim. Bonnie died wearing the wedding ring from her marriage to Roy Thornton, who, after hearing about her death, he said, "I'm glad they went out like they did. It's much better than being caught." And staying true to this perspective, Roy was also shot to death while trying to escape from prison 3 years later.
Bruh.
Unfortunately, Clyde's ring had been destroyed a couple of years prior while he was in prison. Word of the ambush spread fast, and a massive crowd had gathered at the Louisiana town where Bonnie and Clyde's bodies were taken. And saying that things got unruly would be an understatement. Souvenir hunters cut off locks of their hair and blood-stained bits of Bonnie's dress. Two guys even tried to cut off Clyde's ear and trigger finger before Officer Hamer and some other cops put a stop to this sheer degeneracy. Luckily, the bodies arrived at the undertakers intact despite all of the attempts to cut bits off of them. But they were very hard to embalm because the fluid kept pouring out of all of the bullet holes. But luckily, it is said that our boy, the mortician, H. Dillard Darby, was up to the task that he was promised a year prior, and he helped with getting Bonnie and Clyde ready for their final journeys after he was called in to identify the bodies. Each of Bonnie and Clyde's funerals back home in Dallas were attended by over 10,000 people that had flocked to pay their respects. But sadly, there were two funerals. As much as the couple wanted to be buried together, Bonnie's mother didn't allow it, having said he had her in life, he wouldn't have her in death.
Come on,
So,
man.
Bonnie was buried in the Fish Trap Cemetery and then moved in 1945 due to her grave being vandalised. She now rests in Crown Hill Cemetery. At her funeral, cards were allegedly sent by the famous criminals Pretty Boy Floyd and John Dillinger. She also received a massive floral tribute by a group of local newsies who sold over 500,000 papers in the aftermath of her death. Clyde was buried with his brother in Western Heights Cemetery, in a grave marked by an epitaph that he himself had suggested. Gone, but not forgotten. I mean, he's right, you know, like 100 years later and we're still talking about him, but that's still kind of basic. More recently, Bonnie's niece and Clyde's nephew want to honour the couple's final wish of being buried next to each other. However, the costs of moving Bonnie seem to be too high to be feasible. But hopefully, one day, Bonnie and Clyde will be together once more.
Bro, they bodies are literal. They probably not even. They bones is definitely there. They're definitely just ashes at this point, right? I don't know how it goes when you're like decaying and everything, like when you die. I don't know how exactly it go. Like I know once you obviously after a while your skin start to peel off, and I think you're just bones. But does the bones turn into ashes? Is that where ashes come from? I don't know where ashes come from. You know what I'm saying? So, my question is right now. In both of their caskets, what is in the casket exactly? Is it ashes at this point? Is it just dust, bone dust? Like what is it? You know what I'm saying? Like
Years following their deaths, Bonnie and Clyde have achieved folk hero status. Their story has been adapted into numerous media, including a very romanticised 1967 film titled Bonnie and Clyde, and starring Faye Dunaway and Warren Beatty, and also Netflix's The Highwayman from 2019, which followed Frank Hamer and the Texas Rangers leading up to the infamous ambush. Speaking of which, if you want to see the bullet-riddled car that Bonnie and Clyde died in, as macabre as that is, you can. It's on display at Whiskey Pete's Casino in Prim. You know, that town in Nevada that people only know about because of Fallout New Vegas. And interestingly, many people that have been to see the death car have reported some very spooky vibes coming from it, as if it's haunted because they're fucking stupid. Sorry, I hate that shit. With their status as American icons and all of the media that's been made about their lives, I suppose that, in a way, Bonnie's wish to have her name in lights came true. It's just a shame that it happened like this, because she and Clyde really weren't what the world thought they were. The truth was much more tragic. Bonnie and Clyde's crimes were so small in scale that they wouldn't have been much more than yet another string of store robberies if the newspapers hadn't capitalised on those pictures and caused the public to hype them up. Many people saw them as cold-blooded killers when in reality they were just desperately trying to survive a period of great economic ruin. Though they didn't exactly go about it in the most ethical way. You know, at first it was kind of small time, and then some really bad stuff happened, and some people got shot, and then it kind of snowballed, and they got deeper and deeper to the point of, you know, well, we can't stop now, we're going to get the chair anyway, and I think things just got out from under them. So, in the end, the papers made a massive circus out of ordinary people for profit, and the FBI went scorched earth on a couple of small-timers purely out of spite. You know, journalists and three-letter agencies, need I say more? What's quite amusing about the Barrow Gang's image is that Bonnie didn't actually smoke cigars. But for some reason, she was genuinely bothered by the fact that it became associated with her, even though she did smoke cigarettes. It bothered her so much that she would actually tell people that she met to tell everyone that she didn't actually smoke cigars. Because, you know, priorities. I mean, yeah, okay, I'm fine with being known for murder and robbery, but I draw the line at cigar smoking. In fact, the cigar smoking probably wasn't even the most misleading part of how she was depicted in all of the photos. The other misleading part was her holding a gun. Those pictures were most likely just her and Clyde messing around during some free time, because none of the other gang members actually recalled ever seeing Bonnie fire a gun, apart from that one police raid that went horribly wrong. This means that all of the modern media depictions of Bonnie, you know, just being all trigger happy and opening fire on cops with a Tommy gun and shooting anyone that so much as looks at her the wrong way, are most likely all completely wrong. And it's also pretty likely, not 100% confirmed, but pretty likely that Bonnie never actually killed anyone. So, she wasn't really that much of a badass femme fatale. I mean, when she wasn't acting as a getaway driver, she was kinda just there. It is widely theorised that Bonnie suffered from hybristophilia, which is a sexual attraction to criminals, and it's commonly observed in the fucking wild fandoms of Ted Bundy and Richard Ramirez. And you know how serial killers get sent a bunch of love letters when they're in prison? Well, that's hybristophilia. And considering both of the men that Bonnie had in her life, it's not hard to see how that theory came about. Some theorised reasons for how hybristophilia comes about include a lack of a father figure, so fatherless behaviour, wanting to share in the criminal spotlight, or a nurturing impulse. And what do you know? Bonnie turned out to be a clout chaser with daddy issues that said, I can fix him. In fact, she is such a famous case that hybristophilia is arguably best known as Bonnie and Clyde syndrome, because there's no better sign of a healthy relationship than when your names become synonymous with a mental illness. So that we don't end on too sour a note, let's end by focusing on what really matters on Valentine's Day. Love. No matter how fucked up Bonnie and Clyde's story got, you can't deny that their passionate romance drove them more than anything else throughout their crime spree, to the point where they popularised the expression, ride or die. Now, that might be a little bit on the nose, regardless of how apt it is, but I suppose there's a lot to be said for the sheer amount of unconditional love that Bonnie and Clyde had for each other. And I think that everyone deserves to experience love like that at least once in their lives. And with the power of love, you can do anything. Well, except stop bullets.
Hey, man, y'all like, comment, subscribe. Comment, share, react to next, man. Follow me, share, react to. Follow me on Instagram, where I'm most active at. We on a grind to 10K. I'm out.